They said Grandma had dementia, but her final note proved otherwise. I kept repeating that sentence in my mind as I stood under the gray, dripping sky, watching them lower her casket into the ground. The rain wasn't heavy, just that kind of steady drizzle that seeps into your bones and makes you feel colder than you should. But maybe it wasn't the weather that chilled me. Maybe it was the looks my family kept giving one another. Or rather, the looks they were avoiding. Grandma Helen's funeral had drawn the whole clan back to our small town in Pennsylvania, and yet, it felt like no one wanted to be here. Not for her, not for each other. My cousins Joanna and Richard stood together beneath the shared black umbrella, whispering to each other, casting quick glances at me, at everyone else, as if calculating something I couldn't see. Joanna, with her stiff posture and tightly pinned hair, looked like she was already planning her next move. Richard, in his expensive tailored suit, looked bored more than anything, as if this were an obligation he couldn't wait to cross off his list. I shifted on my feet, my shoes sinking into the wet grass, and tried to block out the murmurs around me. The preacher's voice rose and fell in practiced rhythm, but his words barely registered. My eyes stayed fixed on the simple wooden casket, the one Grandma had chosen years ago, because she said she didn't want to waste good money on fancy nonsense. That was Helen all over. Practical, sharp, and more alive at 84 than most people half her age. Dementia. That's what they'd said when she started getting quieter, when she stopped coming to family dinners, when she let the house fall into a bit of disrepair. That's what they'd said when the papers for the power of attorney were signed, when her accounts started getting moved, when the deeds changed hands. Poor Helen, they'd whispered. She doesn't know what she's doing anymore. But I knew better, or at least I thought I did. 2 weeks ago, I'd sat at her kitchen table, watching her pour tea into her favorite chipped mug, the one that said "World's Best Grandma" in faded blue letters. She'd laughed at one of my bad puns, rolled her eyes, and told me a story about how she'd once tricked a door-to-door salesman into buying a set of encyclopedias from her. That wasn't the story of a woman slipping away from reality. That was Helen, clever, wry, full of fire. I swallowed hard and tried to breathe through the knot forming in my throat. The service ended, and people began to drift toward their cars. I waited, watching until the last clump of dirt was thrown onto the casket, until the gravediggers started packing up their tools. My black coat was soaked through by then, but I didn't care. I needed the moment. When I finally turned to leave, Joanna was waiting near the path, Richard at her side. "Derek," she said, her voice sweetened with fake sympathy, "you should come back to the house. We're all gathering there." I nodded, because what else could I do? Refusing would only give them more to talk about. Grandma's house felt like a stranger had been living in it. The warm, spicy smell that used to greet me at the door was faint now, overtaken by the scent of dust and something sour, maybe old wood left too long in the damp. The big kitchen that had been the heart of the house seemed dimmer, despite the bright overhead light. The wooden cabinets with their worn brass handles, the avocado green fridge that had been ancient even when I was a kid, the row of neatly labeled spice jars. It was all still there, but it felt empty. Family filled the space, but it didn't feel full. People spoke in low voices, nibbling at the food someone had set out. Cold cuts, rolls, store-bought cookies that Grandma would have sniffed at. I stood near the window, looking out at the yard that had once been her pride, now overgrown and wild. "She really wasn't herself at the end," Joanna said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "It's so sad watching someone you love lose their mind." Richard, standing behind her, nodded solemnly. "Tragic," he said. "But at least we made sure she was taken care of." I clenched my jaw. Taken care of. What a neat little phrase for what they'd done. I bit back the words I wanted to say. This wasn't the time. Aunt Margaret leaned in toward me. "She's at peace now," she whispered, patting my arm. "You know, dear, she was so proud of you, even when she started forgetting things. She always remembered her sweet Derek." I forced a smile and nodded. My sweet Derek. That's what she'd called me last time I saw her, right before she asked if I could bring her some of that lemon tea she liked. The one Joanna had stopped buying for her because it was too expensive for someone who wouldn't know the difference. I drifted toward the kitchen table, running my fingers along its scarred surface, remembering the countless meals and card games and quiet conversations we'd shared here. On the counter, I noticed the old tin box where Grandma kept her recipes. It was dented at the corner, the paint chipped but still solid. Just like she had been. Something in me ached to open it, to feel close to her again, but I didn't. Not yet. Joanna's voice floated over. It was for the best. She couldn't live alone anymore, and this house, well, it'll be better off with a family in it. One that can take care of it properly. Richard smirked, and I realized in their minds the house was already theirs. Later, when the crowd began to thin, I stayed behind. I told them I wanted a few minutes alone, and they were happy to let me. Probably so they could go back to their plans and scheming. I wandered the house, touching the worn banister, pausing in the living room where her rocking chair sat empty. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, but the world remained gray and heavy. And in that silence, I made myself a promise I wouldn't let them erase her, not her memory, not her wishes, not if I could help it. The house felt even quieter once everyone had left. I stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to the creaks of the old floors, the soft tick of the clock on the kitchen wall, the distant drip of water from a leaky gutter outside. Without the voices and false condolences, the space felt more like hers again, like it was waiting for her to come back and put the kettle on. I slipped off my coat, heavy and damp from the rain, and draped it over one of the kitchen chairs. The kitchen looked exactly as I remembered it, but somehow smaller, lonelier. The wooden cabinets, faded from decades of sunlight, the old avocado green fridge humming softly in the corner, the chipped tile floor beneath my feet. This had been the heart of Grandma's home, and now it felt hollow. I ran my hand along the worn surface of the table, feeling the grooves left by years of chopping and kneading and card games. A faint dusting of flour still clung to the edges, as if she'd only just been here, rolling out dough for one of her famous pies. My chest tightened at the thought. I started tidying up. Not because the house was messy, she'd always kept it neat, even in her final months, but because I needed to do something. I wiped down the counters, stacked some dishes, straightened the chairs. When I reached for a stray mug near the sink, my breath caught. It was the mug. White ceramic, cracked along one side with faded blue letters that read Grandma's favorite. I smiled despite myself. I remembered the day she gave it to me, my 10th birthday. She'd held it out with a grin and said, "Now no one can argue about it, Derek. The mug says it all." I'd felt so proud, so special. I hadn't seen that mug in years. I turned it over in my hands, tracing the crack with my thumb, and as I set it down, something shifted behind it on the shelf, a familiar battered tin box, her recipe box. I pulled it down gently, wiping dust from the lid. The paint was chipped at the edges, and one corner was dented from the time I'd knocked it off the counter as a kid. I could almost hear her voice, half laughing, half scolding, "Careful, or you'll end up wearing the cookies instead of eating them." I opened the lid. Inside, the cards were as she'd always kept them, neatly arranged, worn soft at the edges, with notes in her looping handwriting. Pies, biscuits, soups. Each recipe was a piece of her. I flipped through them slowly, not looking for anything in particular, just wanting to feel close to her again. Then I saw it. A recipe card more faded than the rest, corners curled, a smudge of what looked like chocolate in one corner. The title at the top, in her handwriting, "Helen's Secret Cake." My heart gave a little lurch. This had been her signature dessert, the one she made for every birthday, every special occasion. No one else in the family had ever been able to get it quite right, no matter how often she shared the recipe. I lifted the card out, and something unusual caught my eye. A note scrawled at the bottom in smaller letters, almost as if she hadn't wanted anyone to see it. For my favorite one, "Find the bitter where the sweet hides. The code is in the sugar." I blinked at the words, reading them again and again. What did that even mean? It sounded like a riddle. A message meant for me? Or maybe just one of her little jokes? I sank into a chair, the recipe card in my hands, my mind racing. Grandma had always loved puzzles, word games, hidden meanings. She used to create treasure hunts for me when I was little, drawing maps that led me around the garden, hiding pennies under flower pots. Could this be something like that? I glanced around the kitchen, half expecting to find another clue taped under the table or tucked into a drawer. But there was nothing, just the familiar, comforting clutter of her life, spice jars lined up in a row, their labels yellowed with age. The old radio on the counter, silent now. The window over the sink, its sill empty where her basil and mint used to grow. I turned back to the recipe card. The code is in the sugar. My fingers brushed over the words, feeling the indentations left by her pen. Was it a metaphor? Or something more? I didn't have answers, not yet. But one thing was clear. This was meant for me, for her favorite one. For the boy who'd sat at this table drinking cocoa from that mug, listening to her stories. Carefully, I slid the recipe card back into the tin, closed the lid, and stood. I wasn't ready to figure it out here, with the weight of the empty house pressing down on me. But I would. I would take it home, and I would honor whatever it was she wanted me to find. I grabbed my coat, the mug, and the recipe box, and stepped out into the damp evening air, the door creaking shut behind me. The house stood silent, watching me go, and in my heart I felt it, the first flicker of something I hadn't felt since she died. Hope. The rain followed me home, drumming softly against the single window of my small apartment. I stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to its rhythm, letting the quiet sink into me. The place smelled faintly of coffee and old books, comforting, familiar, the kind of place Grandma would have called cozy, though I always thought that was just her polite way of saying tiny. I set the recipe box on the kitchen counter, next to the battered mug I'd brought with me. The mug looked out of place here, like a relic from a better time. Above it, taped to the cabinet door, was a photo of Grandma Helen and me from when I was 8, both of us grinning, faces smudged with flour, standing in front of one of her famous cakes. I ran my fingers over the photo, then over the recipe card, as if the feel of her handwriting might tell me something. The words of her strange note echoed in my head. For my favorite one, find the bitter where the sweet hides. The code is in the sugar. What was I supposed to do with that? I stared at the card, then at the kitchen around me. The space was small, just enough room for a tiny table, a stove, and a fridge that groaned when it ran. The cabinets were packed with mismatched plates and mugs I'd picked up at thrift stores over the years. A bookshelf in the corner overflowed with paperbacks and old-school textbooks. It wasn't much, but it was home. I set the oven to preheat, pulled out a mixing bowl, and started gathering the ingredients listed on the card. Flour, sugar, cocoa, butter, eggs, vanilla. It was like muscle memory. I'd watched her make this cake so many times, helped stir the batter, licked the spoon when she wasn't looking. As I measured and mixed, the apartment began to fill with the smell of chocolate and vanilla, and for a few precious moments, I was a kid again. Standing barefoot on a kitchen stool, trying to reach the counter, I could almost hear her humming, almost feel the warm press of her hand on my shoulder. When I slid the cake into the oven, I sat down at the table and stared at the recipe card again. The handwriting was neat, like always, but as I studied it more closely, I noticed something odd. Some of the letters, the S in sugar, the U, the G, the A, the R, seemed darker, thicker. Not enough that you'd notice at a glance, but enough that they stood out now that I was looking for it. The code is in the sugar. My pulse quickened. Could it really be that simple? I grabbed a notepad and started writing down the bolded letters, tracing them carefully with my pen. S-U-G-A-R. But it wasn't just the word sugar. Here and there in the instructions, certain letters in those words were also a shade heavier. A G in gently, an A in add, an R in stirring. When I lined them all up, they spelled out a sequence of numbers hidden among the words. 4, 5, 8, 2, 4,582. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding, staring at the numbers on the page. It felt like she was here with me, guiding my hand, smiling at my confusion. But why? What was 4,582? I turned the card over in my hands, as if the answer might be on the back. And there, so faint I almost missed it, was another clue. A word, scrawled in the bottom corner in faded ink. Safe. My breath caught. A safe? Or maybe a safe deposit box? I stood up and paced the small kitchen, mind racing. Grandma Helen had a bank account downtown. I knew that much. She'd taken me with her as a kid to deposit birthday checks, always giving me a lollipop from the teller. Could she have left something there? Something she didn't trust the family to find? I looked back at the cake, rising in the oven, filling the room with its warm, sweet scent. It was more than just dessert now. It was a message, a key. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt like I was doing exactly what Grandma wanted me to do. The next morning, I woke before the sun, unable to shake the feeling that Grandma was leading me somewhere, and that I had to follow. The cake, the code, that single word scrawled on the back of the recipe card, safe. I couldn't ignore it. By 8, I was standing in front of the old bank downtown. The red brick building looked exactly as I remembered it from my childhood. Solid, unchanging. The carved stone above the door read First National Bank, EST, 1893. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish, old paper, and something faintly metallic, like coins handled too many times. The heavy wooden doors closed behind me with a soft thud. At the counter, a woman gave me a polite smile, but before I could speak, an older man emerged from an office to the right. His hair was silver, his glasses perched low on his nose, and I recognized him instantly. Mr. Bennett. I remembered him from my trips here as a kid. He used to slip me butterscotch candies when Grandma wasn't looking. "Derek," he said, adjusting his glasses, "I was sorry to hear about your grandmother. She was quite a lady." "Thank you," I said quietly. I think she left something for me, a safe deposit box. I have a code, 4,582. His bushy eyebrows rose. Come with me." I followed him through the lobby, past dark wood counters and brass fixtures that gleamed in the morning light. The carpet beneath our feet was thick and worn, the pattern faded from years of footsteps. We passed through a heavy door into the vault room, cold, quiet, the air heavy with the weight of secrets. Mr. Bennett stopped at a terminal, typed something in, and frowned slightly. Then he smiled, not his usual friendly smile, but one touched with curiosity. "Well, I'll be," he murmured. "She left a note in the system years ago, says, if Derek comes with this code, let him in." He glanced at me, as if seeing me for the first time not as a boy with sticky fingers and a sweet tooth, but as someone part of a mystery. "Let's get you into that box." He led me down a narrow aisle lined with massive brass-handled safe deposit boxes. Each was stamped with a number, each one a little world of its own. He stopped at one, slid the key into the lock, and turned it with a satisfying click. Together, we pulled the drawer like box free and set it on a table. "I'll give you a few minutes," he said, and stepped back, folding his hands behind him. I took a deep breath and opened it. Inside was a single envelope, thick and yellowed with age, my name written across the front in Grandma's precise hand. Beneath it, another envelope, official-looking, sealed, and stamped by a notary. And a third item, a folded sheet of paper with a list of names and dates, some underlined in red. "My dearest Derek, if you are reading this, then you've followed my little trail. Good for you. I always said you were the clever one. I suppose by now you've guessed there's more going on than the family wanted you to know. They said I had dementia, but that was their story, not mine. I knew exactly what I was doing. I let them think I was slipping so I could see who they really were, and they didn't disappoint. I'm sorry to leave you with this mess, but I know you'll do what's right. The enclosed will is the true one. It leaves everything to you because you're the only one who never tried to take anything from me. I've also arranged for a portion to go to the animal shelter. You know how I love those cats. The list is of those who signed papers against me. I wanted you to know, in case they try to deny it. Trust yourself, Derek. And remember, sometimes the sweetest things hide the bitterest truths. All my love, always. Grandma. I read the letter twice, tears stinging my eyes. Relief flooded through me. She hadn't been lost, not to herself, not to me. But beneath the relief was anger, hot and sharp. How could they? How could they lie about her, betray her, steal from her while pretending to care? I opened the second envelope. The will was clear, official, notarized years ago. Everything, the house, the savings, the small stock portfolio I didn't even know she had, left to me, with 5% earmarked for the local animal shelter. There was no mention of Joanna or Richard, no mention of anyone else, and the list, their names, their signatures, dated beside transactions and legal documents that shifted control from Grandma to them. Evidence of what they'd done, in black and white. I sat there for a long time, the vault quiet around me, the weight of it all settling on my shoulders. Grief, yes, but also a sense of purpose. She'd trusted me to set this right. Finally, I slid the papers back into the box, nodded to Mr. Bennett, and left the bank. The sun had come out, turning the wet pavement to gold, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't sleep much that night. The letter, the will, the list, they played over and over in my mind, as if Grandma's voice was whispering to me through the paper. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I called Joanna and Richard, as well as the rest of the family, and asked them to meet me at Grandma's house that afternoon. There was hesitation on the other end of the line, nervousness, maybe suspicion, but they agreed. Maybe they thought I was ready to sign something, to hand over the house, to fall in line. The house felt different when I unlocked the door that day. Less empty. More like hers again, as if somehow knowing the truth had brought a little of her spirit back inside. The living room was just as she'd left it, the floral curtains drawn open to let in the light, the old rocking chair by the fireplace, the walls lined with family photos in mismatched frames. Her life, her history, all of it right here. I set the papers on the coffee table and waited. They arrived in small clusters, Joanna and Richard together, of course, followed by Aunt Margaret and Uncle Phil, then a few cousins who rarely came around except when there was something to gain. The air grew thick with forced smiles and polite small talk that no one really meant. I could see the tension in their eyes, the glances they exchanged. No one sat in Grandma's chair. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice calm. "I won't take up much of your time. There's something I need to share with you." Joanna folded her arms, her face tight. "Derek, if this is about the house, we can sort that out later. We're all grieving." Richard smirked faintly, as if he already thought he knew where this was going. "I found something," I continued, ignoring their interruptions. "Grandma left me a message. And she left this." I held up the official will, letting them see the notary seal, the signatures, the date, years before any of their so-called legal maneuvers began. The room went very still. "This is her true will," I said. "Everything goes to me, and a donation to the animal shelter, as she wished." Joanna's face flushed red. "That can't be right. She wasn't in her right mind. We had papers." "She was in her right mind," I cut in, my voice steady. "She let you think otherwise to see what you would do. And you did exactly what she expected." I unfolded the letter and read aloud. I wanted to see who would steal before I was gone. "Now you've shown yourselves." Silence. Thick, uncomfortable. The kind that weighs on your chest. Richard shifted his feet. "You can't prove that's what she meant. Maybe she was confused when she wrote it." I picked up the list and laid it on the table. "Here are your signatures, dates, the transactions where you transferred power of attorney, the deeds. It's all here." For a moment, no one spoke. Then, like vultures fighting over scraps, Joanna and Richard turned on each other. "You were the one who suggested we move on the house," Joanna snapped, her voice shrill. "Oh, please." "You couldn't wait to get your hands on her savings," Richard shot back. "Don't act like this was my idea." Their words tumbled over each other, each accusation sharper than the last. The others watched, uneasy, some ashamed, some simply calculating their next angle. I let them go on for a minute, then raised a hand. "Stop." They fell silent, breathing hard. "I'm not going to court," I said quietly. "I'm not here to shame you. But I will honor Grandma's wishes. The will stands. The house, the accounts, it's done. And I hope someday you'll think about what you did, not to me but to her." Aunt Margaret wiped at her eyes, her voice soft. "She always loved you best, Derek. We should have seen this coming." I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. One by one, they left. Some avoided my gaze. A few, the ones who had stayed silent through it all, squeezed my shoulder or murmured an apology. Joanna and Richard were last, still casting daggers at each other with their eyes. But they said nothing to me as they walked out the door. When the house was quiet again, I sank into Grandma's rocking chair. Outside, the sky had begun to clear, the first hints of evening sun glinting off the wet grass. I let the chair move gently beneath me, listening to the soft creak of the wood, the sound of peace returning. Grandma had trusted me. And now, I'd done right by her. 6 months later, the scent of cinnamon and vanilla filled the little shop on Main Street, mingling with the soft hum of conversation and the clink of coffee cups on saucers. The wooden sign above the door read "Helene's Secret," carved carefully by hand and painted in the same gentle blue that had faded on Grandma's old mug. The bakery had been a dream I didn't know I had until I opened those envelopes in the bank vault. Using what Grandma left me, I'd transformed part of her legacy into something living, something that would carry her memory forward. And judging by the steady stream of customers and the warmth in the air, I like to think she'd have approved. Inside, the bakery glowed with soft light, the kind that made you want to linger a little longer on a rainy afternoon. The walls were lined with black and white photos of Grandma Helen, at her wedding, holding a pie with a proud grin, standing in her garden. A few color shots, too, of her with me as a boy, both of us dusted with flour, laughing. The front display case was filled with golden croissants, rich chocolate cakes, fruit tarts glistening under the lights. And right at the center, on a delicate white plate, sat a single slice of Helen's secret cake. The very recipe that had led me to the truth. I kept it there every day, a quiet tribute. People often asked about it, and I always smiled and said it was part of the story of the shop. Some mysteries, I'd tell them, were meant to stay sweet. Business had been good, better than I expected. Locals came for coffee and pastries, and tourists stopped in after hearing about the place from friends. But more than that, it felt like the bakery had become a piece of the community, the way Grandma's kitchen once was. That evening, as the last customers said their goodbyes and the bell over the door jingled softly, I began to tidy up. Outside, rain pattered gently against the windows, streaking the glass and blurring the lights of the street beyond. The smell of fresh bread lingered, warm and comforting. I wiped down the counters, stacked chairs onto tables, and flipped the sign on the door to closed. The bakery felt peaceful in the quiet, the kind of peace that comes from knowing you've done something right. I stood for a moment, leaning against the counter, looking around, at the photos, the soft glow of the lights, the cake in the case, and finally, at the picture of Grandma Helen I'd hung near the register, the one where she was young, her eyes bright, full of mischief and kindness all at once. The rain tapped softly at the window, and I whispered, "Just for her. You really were the smartest of us all."